Hi, my name is David, and welcome to another episode of Your First Dev Job podcast, where we learn about what it takes to get your first dev job. Today, we have a special guest, Daniel. I've actually tutored Daniel a few times when he was doing his coding bootcamp, and I noticed that he had good work ethic. He was very curious about learning the code, and I like to stay in touch, stay connected with students that I see have a lot of potential. And Daniel has been able to get a job after graduating his coding bootcamp. And now we're gonna bring him on to learn about his experience of what he learned going through the process of learning to code and getting his first job. So Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself and let everyone know where you're at in your coding journey?
Sure thing, David. Um, it's really great to see David again. The last time we met, we did a pair programming
Yeah,
session, right? And at that point, I was still in my boot camp, the last month of it. So a lot has changed since then. Um, so as David said, I went through coding boot camp for 6 months. Um, Immediately after that, I was a TA for boot camp for about, I want to say 3 months. Um, but then I got a full-time job as a web developer or junior software engineer. So
mm,
I'm exactly 8 months into that. And yeah, it's crazy how much life has changed in the past year and a half, 2 years, ever since I decided to make this decision and learn how to code. So yeah, here I am making new friends, reconnecting with old friends like David. So yeah, man.
awesome. Yeah, my life drastically changed as well when I committed to learning how to code. Crazy. So what were you doing before coding?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, David, I feel like you're gonna really get to know me today. Um, so what I was doing before coding, I was teaching, right?
Hmm.
I was teaching math, and it was mostly at these like after school, like test prep centers, you know.
Okay.
Um, that and I was teaching dance, right? So I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a breaker, a b-boy. Um, and that's like my passion,
Nice.
my hobby, right? And so I taught dance for about 4 years, taught math for about 3, 4 years as well. And for a while, like, I was cool with it because that work allowed me to, live my passion to the fullest, I guess you can say, right? I'm from New York, by the way. And so
Yeah.
there's just a lot when it comes to the arts around here. But, there came a point where I had to make a decision, right? Because I realized quickly that this wasn't going to be financially sustainable, right? This life that I was living. And at first I was just like, okay, this is fine, right? But then after a while, I was like, okay, I have to actually make a decision. Um, and so many people in my life, either directly or peripherally, were like mentioning this coding stuff, right? Um,
Yeah.
I had some family members, some like a few family members and a few friends tell me directly, like, hey, like I think you might, want to take a look at this stuff. People around me, they know that they can't give me advice directly because I'm stubborn in my own ways, right? But
Yeah.
they know that they have to sort of indirectly hint that stuff to get me to do something, right? And so they're like, yeah, like this kind of stuff kind of it fits with how you think and how you go about your work, right? And if you're a programmer, if you're a coder, then you know what I'm talking about, right? You need a certain kind of mind for this kind of work. And yeah, once I introduced myself to it, I realized, yeah,
Hmm.
this is something I should try. And considering the economy we live in, the market we live in, I mean, people like to say that, oh, the tech industry is like a little crazy right now, but all things considered, that the tech industry is growing, right? And there are opportunities in it, at, at least comparatively, to other industries and whatnot. So yeah, like that was my life, and a big part of my decision to also do a boot camp and now have this job is to enjoy my passion even more. So I still dance, by the way. In fact, I would say like I probably dance a bit more than even when I used to when I was just teaching, right? Because now, um, like, okay, so I work remotely, yeah. So this gives me
Right.
the chance to sort of, you know, form my own schedule. Aside from when I have to work, like with meetings and bugs coming up and whatnot. So because of that liberty, I can practice on my own time, right? And now I have a bit more money to travel and like do stuff through dance, right? So yeah, like things worked out, man. Things really
That's
did.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was gonna follow up with you if how it went back full circle, back to the dance. How you have more time and you
yeah.
can still pursue it. And another interesting point of how like you got into it just by having conversations with people, and I think that's kind of good to keep in mind that you can have an impact. Like, do you talk to other people about coding? Like, if you see that they have potential, do you pass it on, or you just keep it to yourself?
Oh no, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, for sure. Like, um, my younger brother started the boot camp. Not so
awesome.
long ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, he actually finished the boot camp. My bad.
yeah,
Yeah, he did the Codesmith one.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, there's like a few people here and there, like since they know what I did, like they ask me
Mhm.
about it, right? And I give them my
Yeah.
advice. So yeah, of course, like I'm never, I'll never hold back on like sharing knowledge and possibly passing on the torch, so to
Mhm.
speak, right? Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So, how do you go about learning uh coding? Like, you took a boot camp, right? Could you elaborate?
Oh, sure. So yeah, we can get into this. I mean, look, I was very determined when I started my boot camp, right? And when I was in college and when I was in high school, I was always a good student. Like, I
Yeah.
don't mean to sound stereotypical, but I was a pretty straight A student, right? So, when I did this boot camp, I was like, all right, like I'm gonna do well. I'm gonna make sure I really pick up this stuff. And so that whole like dedicate 20 hours of your own time aside from classes thing, like I did that, right? I was pushing like 25, 30 hours a week, on
Hmm.
top of like still working, like, teaching on the side. Um, and yeah, I just absorbed the knowledge real fast, like starting from CSS and like beginner JavaScript, I picked that up real quick and then moving on to like backend stuff like Node and SQL. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how detailed you want me to get into this, but it was basically just like I grinded, like I
Yeah.
completed all the modules, any videos that they wanted me to watch, like I did the work. Also like uh the boot camp that we did, I think we both did the same thing, right? They had like these weekly algorithms that we should have
Hmm.
tried, and I did them all. Like there wasn't a
Awesome.
single bit of coursework that I skipped or didn't do. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, just being very thorough with my work, and if I had extra time, I put in that extra effort, right? All these little things just added up, and then by the time I finished the boot camp, like I was at a point where I need, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right? So I
Yeah.
realized about that there's all these other things I can learn, but I'm pretty confident with what I have. I feel like at least for a beginner, like a full stack developer, you know?
Hmm.
So yeah, like that was my 6 month journey, at least during my boot camp. Yeah,
Nice. That's awesome. Like, I really want to emphasize how you were determined. You really had this mindset that you wanted to learn, and all the exercises, uh, you took it on yourselves, even like the optional ones. So I think that's important for people to seek out these challenges and not like just do them, do these challenges just to get by.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and I could elaborate a bit more
Yeah.
too on my bootcamp experience. The reason why I met you, David, is
Mhm.
because I reached out to you because you were a learning assistant, right?
Right.
And that's what I did on I want to say almost daily basis. Like during my boot camp, I talked to some students who, you know, 3 months into the boot camp, they had never reached out to a learning assistant for help. And I thought that was crazy, because I was like, so you're not struggling with some of these homework assignments, right? Uh, whenever, because yeah, whenever I had a
Yeah.
question, I immediately reached out to someone. You know what I mean? So, um, yeah, just like all that knowledge, and then something else that's very important. During my boot camp, there were office hours before class. Yeah, I
Mm,
went to every single one. Right,
nice.
even if I didn't have a question, right? I was like, I'm paying money for this education. Even if I don't have a question, I'm just gonna show up to the 30 minutes of office hours and just sit there and just like listen in or just talk, you know, because you're dealing with professionals, right? Like these professors and TAs. Okay, maybe some TAs are not professionals, but they're definitely smarter than you are at that point, than I was at that point, right? So
Right.
I figured there's definitely some, even if it's one piece of knowledge, even if it's just something they say in passing, like I want to pick up on things here and there. Yeah, so this goes back to just putting in a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too, asking questions, because that's one of the you pay a lot of money for the boot camp, and you're not gonna get like be able to ask questions. Like there's certain scenarios that come up, and then you're watching videos online. You can't really ask those questions. And like when I took the coding boot camp, I asked questions every day, every class to clarify on what's going on. That's awesome. So so you did the coding boot camp, a 6 month one, and what was your plan as things were finishing up and the boot camp finished? How'd you approach that uh, period of time?
Okay. So once I started to realize that I was getting this, right, it got me excited, right? Like I was like, okay, I can get a job with this as long as I just continue my progress. Yeah. But um, I also I also learned that it's difficult to get a job straight out of boot camp. You know, like
Right.
I hear like some stories, some horror stories even, right? I have a few horror stories of my own actually. Um, but yeah, so basically, I face the reality that even if I do well during the boot camp, it might be a while before I get an actual job. And that's the goal, right? Like no matter
Yes.
what, that's the end goal. So I figured, okay, like I need a plan, and I need to not just get good at this coding stuff. I need to get good at applying and putting myself out there. Um, Thankfully, the program that I was in, they did have like a student service aspect of it, where career services aspect of it, where they actually have like an advisor who tells you what material you need, and they'll actually edit stuff for you and go over like your LinkedIn and your resume, all these good services, right? So I got on that quickly. Like I didn't wait for the last 2 months of the boot camp to reach out. Like I reached out after 2 months. So 2 months in, I was already talking to a career advisor. 3 months in to the boot camp, I was already applying. Now this might sound crazy to people, but the reason why I started to job hunt is solely to get a sense of what the market is like. Like how many entry level jobs really are there, right? And what are the best websites to check for this? I wanted to just absorb as much of this data as possible, right?
Right.
Um, so so yeah, so let's go step by step, right? I had to make sure that my resume and my LinkedIn, especially those two, were looking good, were looking solid, right? Also my
Okay.
GitHub, you
So
know.
let's elaborate
Yeah,
that first.
yeah,
What was your resume strategy?
my resume strategy was mostly working with a career advisor.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just like gradually building it up, making it look presentable, because
Okay.
truthfully, my resume was very outdated up to that point.
Hmm.
So there's that, and then did my best to make my LinkedIn look very presentable. A big piece of that was filling out like my description, the summary
Yeah.
towards the top, and also filling out the skill section. You know, the skill
Right.
section actually was a great way for me to keep track of like what I could sell for myself. Like I know this, and this, right? Um, so yeah, so there was that, and then
Hmm. The
the
GitHub.
part, yeah, in the GitHub, right? Of course.
Yeah.
But the part that was easily the most difficult um, was the applying. There was like a 5, 6 month period where I feel like I applied to probably about 95% of all the entry level engineer or developer jobs on LinkedIn. You know,
Yeah.
like I was like really on it, just every opportunity that existed, I wanted to tap and just put my name out there, right? And of course, like that's time consuming and that's exhausting. And for sure, there were plenty of applications that I half-assed because, I don't got time for a cover letter all the time, And then there were some job postings that I was easily not a great candidate for, right? But I wanted to test that, right? I wanted to see, okay, like which job offerings are do I have the best chance of, getting, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so like, hundreds and hundreds of applications, probably up to 300, right? Maybe even 400. And, you get like a few interviews and you start thinking, okay, like, so now you can narrow down. This is the type of job that I can possibly get with my experience and what's also on my resume, you know? Um, yeah,
So to elaborate down, like, so you're applying
yeah,
to a lot of jobs. The 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 requirements for software engineering jobs, the technology, the skill set vary drastically. So
mm,
once you apply to, you played a lot of volume, then you're just apply to them all, and then you gotten feedback of what kind of jobs you get um traction for, right?
right, exactly, yeah. Man, I feel like I have so much to say about this, David. So yeah,
Yeah, well, let's talk about it.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
What'd you
okay,
learn?
so what I realized was, if a job posting required like more than 3 years, probably
Mhm.
not going to get it, right? And then if a
Yeah.
job posting had some sort of preference for cloud services, unless you have some background in cloud services going into boot camp, probably not going to get it either, right? What worked were, job postings for 0 to 2 years, looking for someone with JavaScript experience and like maybe some SQL stuff, right? Which turns out I was able to use both of these skills in my current job that I have learned from boot camp, right? Um, and also, all right, I should talk about this. So there are a lot of, okay, what do you call these? Like agencies
Yeah.
that they post for openings, right?
Hmm.
And essentially it's not a job right away, you know, like they'll
It's like a
make you do some
placement,
sort of
right?
right. They'll
They
make you
do a
do some sort
training
of
and
training for like,
mhm.
however many weeks. And then from there, it's like a guaranteed job, and then you have to sign like a 2-year contract, something like this. Um, those were my first interviews. I did like 3 or 4 of those
Okay.
during my boot camp, you know. Um, but I quickly realized that this is not what I wanted, right?
Mhm.
Like, even though great, they're giving me an interview, but the pay was not that good. Even the working conditions, I already knew I would not enjoy that stuff. You know, um, they were never remote, and like yeah, like I saw through it. Um, but I figured, hey, I should use this as an opportunity to get better at interviewing, right? Because I
Right.
had the job interviews for a few years, Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I took advantage of that. Obviously, like declined all of those. So yeah, like that's now like we're looking at 3 or 4 months into boot camp. I had this experience already. Um, there was
Hmm.
actually one opportunity that I would have taken because the pay was pretty good. Um, like even yeah, like it was pretty good. But I didn't get it. But yeah, but it's okay. It's okay because again,
Yeah.
like I learned and I went through um a whole process where I interviewed with 4 different people, right, at this company. And then for the last stage, you know, I had to compete with 8 other people who were all in the same Zoom meeting, by the way, right? It was kind of weird. They all brought us to one Zoom meeting and they were going to pick just a handful of us, right?
And this was
And,
different from the agencies, right? This
although
is different. Yeah.
this is an agency,
Okay.
but an elevated one, yeah.
Okay.
Um, and it was so funny because like everyone else, all the other candidates, they either had work experience or had finished the boot camp, like had tech experience, or had finished their own boot camps, right?
Hmm.
Um, And then here I was like, hey guys, I'm 3 months into a boot
Yeah.
camp. Right? Um, and yeah, and so I actually questioned the recruiter, like, okay, like afterwards, I was like, hey, thank you for the opportunity, but why was I allowed to sit in on that? Like, how did I get that far when I clearly was outexperienced by my competitors? And she said, because of your other characters, like you're very determined, you seem pretty enthusiastic, right? And things started to click. I'm like, okay, like these are traits I should continue using, right? So I should keep these traits, you know, so I could again like best present myself to future recruiters, so yeah, like again, I'm just talking about not the step-by-step process of learning,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So let's
Um,
elaborate that. So you learned that these are key skills: being determined, enthusiastic, that recruiters like. But
mhm.
so how would you go into these? Well, first of all, like out of like you applied to like over 400, like, roughly how many interviews have you done? Did you do with all these
Um,
applications, roughly?
yeah. So in total, I want to say like somewhere between 15 to 20 interviews,
Okay.
which is actually not bad, all things considered. You know, Obviously percentage-wise is terrible, but yeah, that's like plenty of interviewing experience. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of chances to talk to someone
Mm-hmm.
and like try to sell yourself. And so yeah, like about the whole like picking up on my attributes, that
Yeah.
started a whole other process. Okay, I need to become more self-aware and pinpoint certain traits that are best about myself and that I could be honest about. I don't want to just like pretend that I'm like this person that a company might want, right? That I have to like honestly figure out like what I'm good at, what my weaknesses are, and hone in on my strengths so I could understand how to talk about them, right? Um, yeah. So yeah, like
So you go and do these job interviews. Um, what patterns? What are the patterns did you notice to that? What kind of questions they would ask you and so forth?
yeah, I mean, so for almost every tech job, it's a multiple interview process, right? So
Yes.
there's first of all there's the interview with HR,
Yeah.
and then there's the interview with the actual tech leads or managers or product managers, right? And
Yes.
then maybe there's a third interview, but for the most part, there's almost always two. Yeah. I find that the HR interview is quote unquote easy because they kind of want you to be engaging. They kind of want to get to know you and like write good things about you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those questions and the questions that HR asks are usually repetitive. So it's the same between companies for the most part. Some form of like tell us about your strengths. Like tell us about
Mhm.
give us an example of you dealing with problems, your leadership experience, all that good stuff. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
the tech interviews that are usually trickier because you don't know what to expect, and like these guys, um, they want to see if they can work with you because they would be
Yeah.
working, right? So the conversation becomes a bit more real, um, and and a few times like I was kind of grilled like on my actual tech abilities, you know. Um, and then other times, I was pressed with like more difficult questions about how like I handled being part of a team, like how I dealt with like specific types of problems, you
Hmm.
know.
So let's dive into like they ask you technical questions. What you learn, like how, because these technical questions can be anything. Like coding so vast. So
Mhm.
what'd you learn? Like how do you handle these technical questions?
I mean, well, first of all, like for anyone listening to this, right? Like I think it's just important that you calm yourself down, right? Because the worst thing you want to do is panic and flub an answer that you actually know, right? Like the reality is if you don't know the answer to a question, you just don't know it, right? And you
Yeah.
got to be honest. But if you do know the answer to a question, it's best that you stay calm so you can actually respond the best way you can, right? So that's number one. Um, what was your question again? Well, was it
Like how do you handle these technical questions?
how do I handle? Yeah, I mean, so that to me again, that's my number one advice. And then something else. would be during the HR interview, right? You might want to ask like, oh, what should I expect? Some form of like, what should I expect from my conversation with the next person from the tech
Hmm.
lead, right? And they'll usually tell you like, oh, like make sure you know this and that. And if they don't, then there was one instance where like the interviewer didn't exactly know how to answer my question. And then later on, she emailed me like, hey, they would be looking for this and this. So that gives you an opportunity to study for the follow-up interview, right?
Right.
Yeah, like there was one example. This was actually for that really close opportunity I had, where I was made aware that they might question me on my knowledge of object-oriented programming, right? And at that point, I knew very little about it. So I straight up for an hour just studied OOP, and then lo and behold, they asked me a question about OOP during the interview, and I answered it gracefully. You know, like
Awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I just got away with that, right? Um, but one of my more difficult technical interviews was there were two of them, and they basically went into my GitHub and asked me to explain the code base for one of my projects. Just straight up, like they're like, hey, like okay, so we noticed on your portfolio that this was one of like your group projects.
Yes.
Direct us to it, right? I opened up on GitHub, and they said, okay, like walk us through everything here. You know,
Hmm.
the file structure, the folder structure. You know, what are the important files? Like go into some of these and just talk me through them, right? Wow, that one was stressful, I gotta say, because in
And were you
hindsight,
expecting
right?
that? Were
No,
you
not at all.
okay?
No. Yeah. Like not at all. But in hind okay, so first of all, in hindsight, that was a great interview, right? Like if I was a tech lead, like I would do that, you know, to really know who I'm hiring. Um, well, secondly, yeah, like, you know, I didn't take my own advice in staying calm because it was like so much at once, right? Because the thing is, like, I knew the code base because, you know, I worked so hard on that project. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in the moment, I was like, oh my God, I'm trying to recollect all these things. Um, and I'm trying to do it fast. And that was messing up my thought process, you know? It would have been better if I just slowed down, even like maybe ask them, like, give me a minute to just like remind myself of some of these things, right? Like, and I'm sure they would have obliged. Um, so yeah, that happened. Um, yeah, that happened.
And that's
Um,
interesting to point. And was the code, the repo, was this a a project you did by yourself, or was it a group project?
this was one of the group projects through the bootcamp.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And the tough thing about group projects, did they ask you more about stuff that you didn't do because you worked on a group together, or you
right.
just emphasized the part you did?
I mean, the truth is, David, I pretty much had my hands in every aspect of that group
Okay.
project, so I knew the code. Yeah. Um, so no issue about that. Um, but yeah, it was definitely just one of those things where like it was a lot at once, and I could have answered it better, you know. Well, I mean, this became a whole hour-long conversation
Yeah.
about the code base, right? So I definitely could have handled that better. But it was a learning experience, and anyways, soon after that interview, I got the current job that I have. So,
Okay.
you know, it's all good. Yeah.
That's good that you went through that. You can expect like one interview will be asking about GitHub code base. So what the reason what I started doing that got me job offers during these interviews was that I would have my project ready to demo and during these interviews and have my code base ready and be prepared. Like, hey, ask me anything you want. Like, I don't wait for them to ask me about this. I have a project prepared. They want to see a demo, and but they can't really ask for it at times because they don't want to be intrusive. So that's a tip I like to give people to have like a demo ready where you can explain pretty much every single line of code. You explain like the thought process of the project to show people during these interviews.
No, I hear you, man. I hear you. Had I known, I would have been prepared. The thing about applying to jobs is that I think you need a system, right?
Yeah.
You can't just like mindlessly start applying. So you know, a system has to take into consideration like what you want and what's plausible. right? Um, Now there are like a bunch of websites out there when it comes to tech jobs, you know. But for me, like I decided that if I could just focus on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
that's fine, right? Because LinkedIn has plenty of job offers, especially in tech, you know. Um, so yeah, so let's start there, right? So now I'm in LinkedIn's job search, and they have all these filters, right? So I make sure I have the proper filters clicked, like entry level, also remote. Like that was important to me actually. So yeah, and like posting like within the last like week or so, these kind of things. Right? I just have to make sure I have the right toggles clicked, and then from there, I just start applying. Right?
Yeah.
Not only do I apply, but I have the email notification thing set. So there's like a batch of new jobs. Like I'm the first to know. Right? As I said earlier, like I was applying to almost everything. Right? Now, the thing about LinkedIn is that they have these easy apply postings, right?
Yes.
And yeah, like it's great. You can apply easily. But the problem with easy apply postings, well, there's two problems, right? First of all, everyone applies. Everyone applies. So
Hmm.
immediately those jobs
Competition. Yeah.
get just like filled up, right? And then number two, and I had to learn this almost the hard way, there's some scams. There are some scammers out there for easy apply. There was actually one case where I almost got fooled into
Oh
believing like,
no.
yeah, 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 and like they almost like I guess the purpose of those scams is to like get my money, right? Because then I have to send a check or something, right? Once it got to that point, I knew it was a red flag. Honestly, it was a red flag from the start, you know. Um, but but yeah, like that happened to me. I was like on the phone with someone who was like trying to scam me, and like going back and forth via email, right? But there were all these red flags, like the domain name was not a company name, right? And it was just inconsistent. Like they weren't getting back to me, right? And also things happened too quick for that job application, right? Like
Yeah,
in a
that's a
matter
big
of
thing. Yeah.
days, yeah, like in a matter of like 2 days, they're telling me I already had the job, right? So yeah, like oh my God, it's so embarrassing to even think that happened to me. But I learned. But you know what? From that point, I told myself like, don't do easy apply, right? Like don't do those. Like it's a waste of your time. Like the first reason alone makes it a waste of time, right? But on top of that, the scam stuff is like, no way. This job that I got was through easy apply because because okay, like after like a bit, I figured okay, like you know what, if as long as I just vet the posting, then I'm good, right? Like, because that's what I didn't do. I didn't like click on who posted it and like, right? So, every time there's an easy apply, all I did was just click on who posted it, see if the person's legit, see if the company's legit. If it looks good, okay, fine, let's go for it. You know what I mean? Like again, like I'm just applying to everything at that point. Um, so yeah, that's what happened. That's how I found
Awesome.
the job and I got it. Yeah, yeah.
And this is a healthcare company, right?
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
we specialize in healthcare tech. So almost all of our clients are in the healthcare field. Mhm.
Okay. And you didn't know anyone at this company, right? It was a code application. And did
Yeah,
you
cold application.
did you message anyone with the application, or you just hit the button and you just heard back from them?
Nope. Yeah, it
No.
was just a straight up cold application. And
Awesome.
like as I said before, I was working with a career services
Yeah.
guy, right? And they had told me like sometimes it's actually helpful to like add a recruiter, right? Like send them a message or use your referrals. Like I was working with multiple career advisors, and I had one tell me that like almost all of the jobs that his, I guess, students get are like from referrals. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
I
yeah, like
actually disagree. I disagree. I think messaging people is kind of pointless.
right, right. No, no, I mean, I could see why it might work for some other people, but it,
Yeah.
it didn't do anything for me.
Okay.
And also, I mean, this is people are gonna have an opinion on what I say, but I feel some type of way about like asking for help, like asking for a kind of favor from like my friends and stuff. You know, like, can you give me a job? Right? Like we've known each other for so long. Can you give me an interview? Right? I hate doing that kind of stuff. You know, so it was just not my style to like try to get a referral. You know, or try to like talk my way into a
Interesting.
job. Yeah, yeah,
Because I'm sure you have friends in tech. You didn't try to if their company was working. Okay. I have friends in
yeah.
tech, and I was able to get the referrals for them, but I couldn't pass their technical interviews, so
Yeah.
it didn't matter. But yeah, okay. Okay, so you got your job through code applying in a healthcare company. So what's the tech stack you're currently working with now?
I've been on two projects. All right. The first project was mostly SQL,
Mhm.
and the second project is mostly React, JavaScript. And
Okay.
so I'm so thankful for my bootcamp experience because the bootcamp covered these things, you know. So I was just building on top of like my foundational knowledge.
Okay. So you're working with JavaScript and React and now, and so looking back, like, what do you think you could have done more to prepare for this job?
Um, I don't really think that way, to be honest. I've never really asked myself that question or thought, oh, I could have been more prepared. I just
Yeah,
see it as
just to
like
dive in.
a journey, right? Like just
Yeah.
okay, like even if I feel a little bit underprepared, like I've worked I worked really hard to get to this point. So at that point in time, I'm thinking I'm as prepared as I can be, right?
Okay.
Um, and then from there, I just make the right decisions and actions to get myself even more comfortable and acclimated with my work. So I work a lot with my tech lead.
Yeah.
Almost on a daily basis, I'm talking to this guy. And even like a few weeks prior to, as I said, I worked on two projects, right? I was made aware that I was going to move to the React project like a few weeks out. And so I just studied React, right? I went into the documentation. By the way, React's new documentation is great, okay? And I just read the whole damn thing, right? Like did the whole exercises and whatnot, right? Like I understand that there are people that might not be able to do that. But for me, like I could really just sit for hours and just get through material, like
Hmm.
on a daily basis. So like I did that. So yeah, like yeah, can't say that. Oh man, I should have prepared better. I just did what I thought I had to do, and if
Yeah.
mistakes are made, then I just rebound. But for the most part, I kind of want to say like, yeah, I did well to prepare myself at each stage, getting a job, doing well at my job. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I've definitely noticed the pattern. Like the person I interviewed with the last podcast, he also he got a wait, before I do that. So how long did it take you since completing the boot camp to get this job?
2 months.
2 months. Okay.
And something, I'm sorry, but something that I should also mention is that because I realized how hard it was to get a job during my boot camp, one of the things I did was apply to become a TA, right?
Yes.
Um, and I started working as TA like literally the week after my boot camp was over. Now this was so helpful because now I actually could put some work experience related to coding on my resume, and I can continue learning um, as work, right? Like, I mean, it was always gonna be my plan after the bootcamp to continue learning, but as a TA, now I have even further incentive to learn, right? So yeah, like it was so helpful on both of those fronts. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, the I was gonna say, so you got a job 2 months afterwards. The other person, Austin, I interviewed with, he also started applying like halfway through the coding boot camp, and he got a job like 2 weeks afterwards because
Ooh.
he was applying a lot uh during the coding boot camp. So definitely noticed the pattern that you really you make the most out of boot camp, the most out of your opportunities there you take the advice from your career counselors, like optimizing the GitHub, LinkedIn, uh, resume, and how your interviews, is that the patterns with the HR is more like service level, but with the technical managers, you have to be prepared to like talk about your projects and so forth. So, and be determined throughout the process. So, any last pieces of advice for developers, aspiring developers, learning to code and getting their first job?
Yeah, sure. Before I say that,
Yeah.
were you able to hear the notification sound, by the way, or is that
No.
just me? Okay, okay, thank God. Okay, thank God. I didn't want it to bother the recording.
Wait,
But
can you give me a little pause? I'll edit it out.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay, go.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So my number one piece of advice, and I've been actually wanting to say this from the start of this conversation, is you have to be so determined. You have to envision what your life is going to become, right? Like you want your life to change. Yeah. And so unless you
Yeah,
have that hunger and you have the grit to uh, reach your goal, um, it's gonna take a while to happen. I mean, look, people get lucky. I understand, but you know, the one of the themes of this conversation has been there's a lot of competition out there, right? Um, and like it took like so much out of me to get a job 2 months after bootcamp ended. You know what I mean? And look, to this day, I only know of one other person from my cohort. Oh no, no, sorry. I think there's a second person. Um, but yeah, like out of the 20 or so people that attended my cohort, I only know less than a handful that actually got a job, right? And I imagine it's more of the same for a lot of cohorts out there, you know. So yeah, like it really, for me, like it really required me to consistently be the most hardworking version of myself um, to get a job and to change my life, right? Um, and yeah, so you gotta be prepared mentally for that. Obviously emotionally too. Um, yeah, like aside from the tech, aside from the knowledge, like that stuff will come, right? Like especially again, like if you think you have the kind of mind for it. I know people that don't really have the mind for coding, right? That's cool. Like they do what they do well, and that's great. Um, but once you have established that, once you understand that about yourself, put in the effort, make it happen. Yeah, it's just about guts at that point. Yeah.
yeah, that's you definitely have to be determined. It's very hard. You're gonna have to work hard at this. Just so like people have the expectation that you have to work hard. Um,
Hmm.
Lastly, it came up that you brought it up again that you mentioned in the beginning as well. So what kind of mindset do you think uh, a good engineer has?
What kind of mindset does a good engineer
Because you mentioned that people said you have this mind for it, and then you see it, you you see it in others.
have? Okay, okay. Man, there's so much to this question. I feel like this can become a whole thing now. We're going longer than you expected, right? Well, first of all, like you gotta love to learn, right?
Yeah.
You gotta be open to learning. To me, like I've said this so many times to people who interview me, like I really enjoy learning, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and so we live in a changing field, right? Like recently, there's been so much AI stuff coming
Yes.
out. Lambda 2 just became open source, right? And so yeah, there's constantly more knowledge to gain, even if it's not directly tied to the work you're doing, you know. Yeah, so that's number one, right? Number two, you have to think and work systematically. Um, I know that might sound common sense to a lot of people, um, but there are others who they might not care for that as much, and that's fine. Like there's type of work where um, this like very rigid, structured mindset might not be ideal. But the type of work that I do, like everything needs to be logged somewhere, either mentally or physically, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to be working with people, especially at your first job. You're going to be working with a lot of people or like a leader, and it's very important to keep track of your work. Um, and that's not just for like uh like teamwork stuff, even for your own tasks, like debugging something or building something, right? Like having a system so you know like where where you are in the task, like how much progress you've made and how much time it takes to do these things. All of these things need to be tracked, right? So yeah, being systematic about things super important. Um, I think an obvious one to mention here while I'm thinking about it is being able to work with a team, right?
Yes.
You know, so communicating well and also listening well, right? Especially as a junior, it's very important for me sometimes to just stay quiet, you know, like put whatever ego I have to the side and just listen to whatever feedback is taking place, or even if it's just a conversation about, whatever it is that's going on in the meeting or a review, just listening, absorbing as much as you can. Super important for your growth and for your health too. Um, okay, let's see. There's, I want to make sure I cover as much as possible about this
Yeah,
question.
keep going. What else is on your mind? Because these
Yeah,
are
yeah,
definitely good
yeah.
points.
Okay, so yeah, so what's a good mentality for a coder? Good teamwork, good communicator, thinking systematically, um, wanting to learn a lot.
Mm,
Um, oh, being very detail oriented. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, you have to be meticulous about what you're typing, right? Um, yeah, like the smallest thing, punctuation mark, a capitalization, you have to care about that kind of stuff. And on this, actually, this is something that I learned not everybody has, right? Like there are some people who are, look, there are some smart, hardworking people out there who don't care that much about the details sometimes, right? Because like they could just quite literally care less. Like they want to shift their focus on more macro things, you know. Um, but as a developer, as an engineer, like you gotta be granular
yeah.
about what you're doing,
You
right?
do code reviews, right? Or your team
I
does it?
I do
Yeah.
code reviews,
The
yes. And
details matter a
yeah,
lot in that. That's like a practical example of paying attention to details. It's when you do code reviews that people need to keep in mind.
exactly, exactly. So even just today, like well, someone reviewed my code and told me that, hey, this works, but it can be done better.
Yeah.
So you got to change this and this and this. And yeah, that again, that just came down to him knowing, in a detailed way, like, all right, like this is how you should, make it better. So yeah, there's that. Um, Man, I am so afraid that like when I leave this call, I'm gonna think back on this question and say I should have mentioned that. But like, but yeah, I guess I covered a lot, right?
No,
That,
yeah,
that, that's a good one. Yeah, yeah,
we got the gist because yeah, I think these are because when you have interviews with other engineers, like these are things that they're looking for, someone that pays attention to the details, someone that is like a team player because the work is hard. You have to do a lot of problem solving, and you have to be to work together to solve them. So they look for these skills, and they look for someone who wants to learn, and who's fun to work with, enjoyable to work with, rather than we all have like that one group project member that like brings the team down that no one wants to have on their team, right? So these are key skills um, that I think you brought up. That's good points.
Yeah. And actually, I guess the last thing I want to say, I mean, I did say being a good communicator is important,
Yeah,
right? But just even like that is like as part of that, yeah, you want to be a good team player, you know. Um, I've been blessed with the fact that most of my team members throughout my coding experience so far, whether it's bootcamp or my work, have been great. You know, like there was rarely an instance where I dealt with someone like, oh man, I don't really like working with this guy on the team. But I know what it feels like to be part of a team environment where you don't want to be, right? Like outside of coding mostly, you know. And I can
yeah,
only imagine like how that might bring a tech team down, you know, and especially if it's like a remote situation, right? Um, where you're already isolated, right?
right.
So yeah, super important that's a character of yours. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
even if you have to develop it, right? Like it's important.
yeah. That's why these jobs are so competitive, and you need multiple rounds because they want a good player on their team.
Exactly,
Awesome,
exactly.
awesome, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing your journey of making it. I think these concepts of being determined, working hard at it, being a learner, communicating, these are very good things to keep in mind for aspiring developers out there. Thank you so much, Daniel.
No doubt, no doubt. Nothing else. That's all the questions you got for me. I could keep
That's
going.
all.
Yeah.
That's good. It's good for now. We can do a part two if necessary.